Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the New Age magazine, predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. On this podcast, we take a deep dive into the articles of the history, people, and lessons of Freemasonry as written in the New Age magazine and their pertinence to both everyday, personal, and Masonic life. Hosted by brothers Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree, and Chris Ruley, 32nd degree KCCH. Articles from the New Age magazine read by Matt Bowers and brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the world. Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the New Age magazine, predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. I am one of your hosts, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, along with the Honorable, especially laid back looking.
Oh, man.
Brother Chris Ruley, 32nd degree KCCH. What's happening, Brother Chris?
How are you, Brother Bowers?
I'm doing pretty good. Not looking forward to driving into the district, or driving out of the district, I should say, tomorrow, with school being back in. I only passed one school on my way out, but it's enough to, make you want to go postal.
Yeah. Well, as someone with two young children, I'm very excited that kids are going back to school and I get a little bit of a break. Summertime used to be great for when you were younger. Mm-hmm. Then when you've got kids, you just now have to take care of kids during the summer. So,
well, wait a minute.
As much as we love them, good to have in school.
I know your youngest isn't school age, like traditional school age yet, but how old is your oldest?
Well, our oldest is 3 and he's going into pre-K soon.
Gotcha.
But so this is so irrelevant to the podcast, but our daycare follows the school schedule for our county.
Gotcha.
So she herself is used to be a school teacher, so she follows that school schedule.
Okay.
And so it's so when she has off in the summer, she also takes off from work. So we took care of the kids in the summer. Gotcha. Nevertheless, I'm sure there's plenty of adults who appreciate the fact that kids are going back to school and they don't have to watch them as much during the summer.
Well, who was it? Was it Staples or Office Depot or one of those that had the back to school sale commercial with the Christmas song? It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Yes, and I completely understand what that means.
And the mom or dad was dancing down the aisle while the kids were sulking behind them.
That's right. That's right.
And also, I don't want to forget about this. Also, you have a something new that just was released.
Yes. So I guess this is going to be slightly timely and perhaps not evergreen. But my book, Brother Lafayette, is now out. It's open for purchase. You can get it at mccoy.com. You can also get it through my website if you want a signed copy, through chrisruley.com. And so we did a podcast on it with Brother Maynard, and just talking a little bit about Lafayette and his experiences. And so I'm pleased to say that the book is now out. You can get it yourself and read all the interesting things that I've been researching for the last 3 years.
This is true. I have read all the interesting things that you've been researching for the last 3 years, and hopefully sometime soon, I will have the audiobook version available to you, and we can get that up and running on Audible and all that good stuff for people to have a listen to if they don't care to read. It's right. It's a cool audiobooks. If you think about it, and I think we discussed this recently, it's not a new thing, because sharing history verbally, orally, however you want to say it, was long around before written word.
Yeah, of course. Audio, and there are people, of course, who, not to go back to the whole teaching discussion. Actually, we're going to be talking a lot about teaching today. So, mm-hmm. in fact, you'd be surprised. So this is actually quite relevant. But I think some people prefer an auditory education experience versus a written education versus a tactile. I know that there's a better word for it, and perhaps a teacher, Mason, is saying the word, screaming it out loud right now. But there is the audio, there's the visual, there's the tactile version of learning, like learning through doing. So for those who might not necessarily learn or feel like they're enjoying the reading experience, they can certainly get the audiobook experience, which is coming out in a couple weeks, pending Matt Powers' schedule and his ability after work.
Correct. And if I were to add to what you said as far as learning, if I could quote Brother Will Rogers, this is a quote, one of my favorite quotes ever. There are three kinds of men: the one that learns by reading, the few who learn by observation, and the rest of them that have to pee on the electric fence for themselves.
You know, I just can't think of a good transition into this article. So perhaps this is a good way to transition into the great article, which is the Self-Actualizing Mason.
Yes, from February 1980, written by Brother Kenneth A. Lingenfelter. And I'm trying to think of the first time, well, for starters, great choice on the article, but I'm trying to think of the first time that self-actualization was explained to me, probably in school. I can't remember if it was in high school or when I attempted college. I never went to college. I attempted college, was very bad at it. But to give the Google definition of self-actualization, it is the realization or fulfillment of one's talents and potentialities, especially considered as a drive or need present in everyone. That was Abraham Maslow's, I believe, his definition of it. And then later on, the three components from Kurt Goldstein, they highlighted the holistic nature of self-actualization being physical, psychological, and social well-being.
Right.
What you got to add?
I don't think we can add, you know what? Let's go through the article and then let's dive into Maslow. Let's dive into something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm not sure if you took a look at that.
I did.
We're going to get pretty intense in this article.
Okay, so here's my reading of The Self-Actualizing Mason by Kenneth A. Lingenfelter, 32nd degree, from the February 1980 issue of the New Age magazine. As Masons, we should expect from ourselves, as well as our fellow Masons, a higher degree of principle and morality than the average man possesses. This is not to say we should set ourselves apart or above non-Masons, but we as Masons should continue to set examples of courage, justice, and compassion. A Master Mason should continually strive to function at the peak of his capacities. He should always be seeking his God-given potential as husband, father, friend, and careerist, and should always be strong of body, mind, and spirit. If we were to study great men of the past, many of whom were Masons, we would find similar outstanding characteristics inherent in each of them. The eminent psychologist Abraham Maslow studied 49 successful people such as Lincoln, Thoreau, Einstein, and Schweitzer in order to obtain some idea of the characteristics inherent in persons of great nature. He found 15 outstanding characteristics in these people, and he calls them self-actualized. Self-actualization is an ongoing process and is not a state of being that one can obtain instantly. Put simply, self-actualization is an active will toward health, an impulse, and impulse toward growth, or toward the actualization of human potentialities. The following are the 15 characteristics found by Maslow to be common in self-actualized persons. Number 1. More efficient perception of reality and more comfortable relations with it. The self-actualized person is capable of tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity. Number 2. Acceptance of others and self. He accepts himself as he is and is not defensive or apologetic, nor is he intolerant of others because they do not conform to his views. Number 3. Spontaneity. Self-actualizers are spontaneous in thoughts and behavior. Number 4. Problem centering. The self-actualized person concerns himself with problems outside of himself. Number 5. Detachment and a need for privacy. Although he enjoys others, his need for privacy and solitude is important to him. Number 6. Autonomy, independence of culture and environment. He is relatively uninfluenced by local customs. Number 7. Continued freshness of appreciation. There is an almost childlike appreciation of life and its daily challenges. Number 8. Mystic experience. The self-actualizer, more often than others, has experiences in which he feels more powerful and more helpless than ever before. The more he learns, the more he realizes how little he knows. Number 9. Social interest. He shows an interest in others and can identify with another's problems. Number 10. Interpersonal relations. The self-actualizer does not bear long-lasting grudges, and his relationships with others are deep and meaningful. Number 11. Democratic character structure. He respects others regardless of race, creed, or upbringing. Number 12. Discrimination between means and ends. The self-actualizer enjoys his work. He does not work only for a paycheck. Number 13. Sense of humor. It is spontaneous and philosophical. Number 14. Creativeness. He is given to expressiveness and perceptiveness in everyday life. Number 15. Non-conformity. The self-actualizer does not purposely swim against the tide, but is always open to new experiences. Masonry can release each man's inner capacities to further himself as a man and as a Mason. Brother Theodore Roosevelt told us we must live our lives to the hilt. To do so, we must practice the doctrine of self-reliance so that we may learn there is no need to lean on others. As the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council, 33rd degree, Henry C. Clausen, said in his commentaries on morals and dogma, "You are first rate, front rank, in the forefront, not second string." And we're back with Brother Chris and Brother Matt Bowers. So the 15 characteristics. Well, let's start first. Let's talk about who Abraham Maslow was, and was he a Freemason?
I'm not really sure if he was a Freemason. I didn't take a look at this. I suspect he wasn't, given the fact that the author did not note his Masonic connections if he was one.
True.
I'm not sure. Did you get a chance to see if he was a Mason?
I didn't, but what you just said makes sense because you would think they would have given, or he would have given a little bit of, the initiation, the passing and the raising information, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Even if it's been told 10 times over,
Right. Okay. So we have to do two things in this. So number one, let's talk about the article itself, the construction of it, the context here, because I always find when I'm reading stuff and I've heard from folks who've listened to these podcasts that they appreciate the context. So this is 1980. This is after, the sort of boom in Freemasonry. And the type of articles we're starting to see, well, actually not even starting, what we've got maybe about 2 decades into are now more introspective articles. So in the New Age magazine, which started in 1904, the first couple decades really, or actually the first decade, or perhaps the first 2 decades, were really in this National Geographic style format, which is articles on science, on mathematics, on fictional stories, nonfiction, travel, all this stuff that we've sometimes, in fact, we've actually covered in previous iterations of this podcast. In fact, the last one we did was on science, the progress of science, and we talked a lot about the advancements in science that were featured as articles. You get into the 40s and 50s, and things start to shift. It's less about what's going on in the world, more about Freemasonry, more about, politics, quote unquote, Americanism. We're starting to see some of that in the articles. Then you get into the 70s and 80s, and these are what I call the Reader Digest versions of these articles. These are short form instead of long form articles, maybe 1 or 2 pages, often biographies. Americanisms is still there. And then what we get something that we're talking about today, which is a slight curve of this self-improvement, self-help type of articles like the Self-Actualizing Mason. Now, this article was printed or published, in 1980 edition, as you mentioned. And so it's slightly non-Masonic in that it is introducing concepts and theories and ideas that are actually coming from the business world. They're coming from psychology. It's coming from different disciplines outside of Freemasonry. And so what Brother Lingenfelter here is trying to do is he's trying to say Master Masons should strive to be better than themselves. He offers a couple different attempts, but he basically grounds his work under this Maslow, or whoever this Maslow guy named Abraham Maslow. Now, if you learned anything about Abraham Maslow, you may know that Maslow has, or is very popular, he came up in psychology with this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, let's pause on that for a second. We're not going to talk about that yet. But in the article, he basically says, well, he found 15 characteristics that Maslow found that apply appropriately to being a good Mason in your life, in your daily life, in engaging with Masons. And so that is what the article is giving you. It's giving you 15 of those characteristics that Lingenfelter suggests are characteristics that Masons should have in order to engage with themselves, with their family, with the public, with other Masons.
Exactly. And what would be, just kind of thinking as you were speaking about that, what would be a fun thing to dig into with these 15 different characteristics would be which characteristic could be, what's the word I'm looking for? Could equate to which of any of our degrees, and going back, through the first 3 Blue Lodge craft degrees, all the way up through the 4th through the 32nd Scottish Rite degrees. It would be interesting to see how those come into play with any of those. But also, this was something we talked about ahead of time for ourselves. We talked about what of these 15 characteristics, which of, pick 3 that we think we most embody in ourselves, and then pick 3 that we could potentially strive towards. And sure. I don't know about you, but for me, both of those were it was a little bit more challenging than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I think there's obviously, as you go through it, you may find ones that you find important right now.
Right.
It really depends on the context. There's a lot of, like anything else, when you're reading and you're talking about, degrees or characteristics or all the different things that associate Freemasonry, I think context is always matters, and it's so sort of important. So perhaps, Matt, what we should do for the benefit of this podcast is perhaps you and I can go back and forth. So let's start with the 3 things that we think are important, and then we'll do the 3 things that we wish we were better on.
Sure.
Okay. So I will say I find the first characteristic to be something that is extremely important. And I think it's a characteristic that I wish, now I'm saying this as an active Mason, a sort of busy, I don't like the term professional Mason, but I guess in the context we'll apply it here.
Sure.
Number one, what Maslow, or the characteristic that he's saying, is more efficient perception of reality and more comfortable relations with it. The self-actualized person, or in this context, Mason, is capable of tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity. Now, I think it's very important, especially as a candidate in Freemasonry and as a Master Mason, perhaps a Royal Arch Mason, a Knight Templar, a Scottish Rite Mason, whatever, that I think if you want to be successful, you do at times have to embrace the fact that you cannot control everything, that there will be times of uncertainty and ambiguity. What you do with that realization is what makes you a successful person. So I think number one, I think I think that is absolutely right. A self-actualized person is capable of tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity. I think I'm going to just pick 2 others. A continued freshness of appreciation. That's number 7. There is almost childlike appreciation to life and its daily challenges. I think, and again, this is just my perception, that we often focus on very mundane or very trivial things as Masons. We've got to answer this, we've got to go for this, there's a problem, we have to deal. We're always trying to solve a problem, we're always trying to solve for X. And at certain times, we don't have the opportunity to step back and take a look or appreciate what we've worked on. So, for example, you can stress and stress and stress about getting a degree conferral done. We've got to get this degree done on this night. We've got to order food from the caterers. We got to make sure the candidates are informed. We got to make sure the blah, 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 all this stuff. But at the end of the night, if you don't take a moment to step back and look at your accomplishments for that night or for that evening or perhaps the next day, I think you lose the value in why you were doing it. And I sometimes think, this is just my perception again, that sometimes there are brothers out there that focus so much on doing and doing and doing, they never take a step back to appreciate, because they'll say, well, this was wrong, or you missed up this line, or the food was okay, I wish we did it better, rather than stepping back and going, wow, wasn't this great that we got 4 new guys into the fraternity, or we initiated, or we made the Master Masons. So I think that freshness, or that continued appreciation, that childlike appreciation for life and daily challenges is a great example. The other thing that this is just something that we have to all figure out, which is number 10, interpersonal relationships.
Sure.
Freemasonry is inherently a social organization. You go through the initiatic experience with other people, whether you like it or not. There is no initiation, or at least in Freemasonry, there's no initiation where I go, I'm going to give you the book, I'm going to give you the ritual, and you go through it yourself in a dark room. You are all brought in from an outside group into this sacred space, but as a community. And so interpersonal relationships are important. Interpersonal relationships will ensure that you're a successful person in life. They'll make sure that you're a successful person in your family. They'll make sure you're a successful person in your professional pursuits. And so even and in Masonry. So I've learned that the hard way at certain times, where I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself, and I'm going to try really hard, and by doing so, we will be successful. Well, it came at a cost, and so at ruining interpersonal relationships, that hurt. So I think those are 3 very important things that you would do out of those 15. But some of these also are very good ones.
Sure. For me, the 3 that, and maybe these are coming from more for myself, from more of a personal end of things. Maybe not, who knows? But number 5, detachment and a need for privacy. Although he enjoys others, his need for privacy and solitude is important for him. And I took that as, sometimes you just need to not Mason.
Yep.
Sometimes when you get, for people like yourself, myself, Brother Maynard Edwards, where it's, it is our job. We are professional Masons. You need to step back, and for me, me being a musician, I need to step back and use that as my outlet for, doing other things. I can't get so wrapped up in Masonry that I get sick of it. And I think that goes for a lot of brothers that decide right out of the gate to join a million different appendant bodies. And then the next thing they know, they're just burnt out beyond repair. And they don't want to be involved because they're done. They're cooked. Another one, number 13, go figure, sense of humor. It is spontaneous and philosophical. If you can't have fun with this, if your demeanor and your way of being is just solemn and, just boring, when we see degree work, it's performed. There's a performative nature to what we do. There's a performative nature to what I do,
Right.
And you have to have a sense of humor about it sometimes. Me goofing with you at the beginning of this podcast every time, and I truly think of a way to goof with you at the beginning of the podcast every time we do one, just to have fun with it, because if I just sit here and go, and now Brother Chris Ruley, 32nd degree KCCH, every time in and out. If I did that one time, it would be fine. If I did it every time, I'd be ready to stab myself in the neck with a pencil, because it just wouldn't work. And also, number 12, discrimination between means and ends. The self-actualizer enjoys his work. He does not work only for a paycheck. I thoroughly enjoy every opportunity that I have to do with the Scottish Rite, whether it's doing the podcast with you, doing the Scottish Rite Journal, audiobooks. Another part of my job is doing online petitions. I love getting that stuff together for other valleys to utilize for membership because it makes their job easier. By me doing the reading of the Scottish Rite Journal, if a brother can't sit down in front of his computer or with a printed copy to read it, he can sit on his ride to work and, depending upon how long his ride is, hear however many articles from the journal, me reading, or going so far back as to when Brother Maynard Edwards did it and was reading articles from the journal.
Yep.
So those are the three for me. I mean, there's some other ones, that maybe the one that I was most curious about though was number 8, mystic experience. The self-actualizer, more often than others, has experiences in which he feels more powerful and more helpless than ever before. The more he learns, the more he realizes how little he knows.
Yeah, I think there's a lot baked into that.
Yeah.
There's a lot baked into that number 8. And we'll talk a little bit about transcendence in with Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a minute. But I think that's where he's talking about. And we'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay.
So to do the second part, I think to me, the thing that I'm trying to work on, or at least, one or two things that I'm trying to work on, I think it's tough. I think interpersonal relations, ironically, as I mentioned, is one of the things that I think is important. I think I'm still working on that. I think everyone's working on that. I think that also has to do with, and this I can only say for myself, but I think as one shifts in their life circumstances, having a kid I have more than one kid, but having a kid, 2 children, and doing masonry and balancing that with work and life and all these things. I think, there are times where you have to have tough discussions with brothers. There's times when you have to have tough discussions with, your set expectations rather on the things that you can and can't do. And then that strains or that weakens interpersonal relationships. And so I think number 10, again, interpersonal relations, that's something that I'm working on myself, trying to say no at times, being a little bit more worried about, here are the things that I can do, here's the things I can't do, and then making sure that I'm doing it in a way where I'm respecting my family and myself and everyone else's time. The other one I think is number 14. I think creativeness is always a thing. To me, that's just a big thing. Number 14 is creativeness. He is given his expressiveness and perceptiveness in everyday life. So that idea is, how do you become a good writer? How do you become a good communicator? How do you create? And by create, it doesn't necessarily mean, I have to write or I have to create a piece of art or music. It's really about just being creative in everyday life, finding ways to, create things, to do things, to find time to be with friends, to try out a new dish or a new, beverage. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of that spontaneity of creativeness. And I think that's something that we all deal with, especially if we are dealing with a life that's very regimented. You wake up at this certain hour, you go to work, you come back, and maybe you have 30 minutes in your day to do something, to read a book, to watch TV, to do something that you want to do. So I think that's a tough one. And then, the number 12 is discrimination, but it's discrimination between means and ends. And I think that's a very important one. The self-actualizer enjoys his work. He does not work only for a paycheck. I believe in that wholeheartedly. I have a professional job. I consider that a job where I earn my living, and I attempt to do my job well in order to earn my living. But in Masonry, I love doing the things I'm doing with you and writing, because that to me is the between the means and an ends. I don't need to do it. I do it because I enjoy to do it. And by doing so, it enables me to be creative, enables me to share information with others, and hopefully entertain and educate.
Right.
I think those are my 3.
For me, it's funny. For a couple of them, it wasn't so much the front end of the description. It was often the It was sometimes the back end of it. Like number one, more efficient perception of reality and more comfortable relations with it. The self-actualized person is capable of tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity. I have more trouble with the last part, the last sentence of that one than anything else. I don't like when things are uncertain or ambiguous, and I do my best to make sure that I've got something clear in my vision of where I want to go. And then when someone isn't in theirs, oh my gosh, it'll throw me into a tailspin sometimes.
Right.
And that one's really, really tough for me. And then number two, acceptance of others and self. It's not so much others. I've thankfully learned a long time ago that I can't change other people. I can only change myself. And that's tough enough. It's if you're trying to beat your head up against the wall of trying to change other people, stop it. It's never going to work. Change yourself. Change in. And the other thing with that I have a tough time with, my whole new within the past couple of years of speaking, I don't get it. I don't get what people hear. I just need to try to get better at it and just keep moving forward. I still don't hear it. I still think I sound like the biggest dork on the planet. That's just how it is. And then another one, the third one was probably the continued freshness of appreciation. I hate saying I, but that's kind of where it comes from. I need to get back to that with and it's, and even with music, a lot of my working career has been around playing music, and it still somewhat is, but I just want to get back to being a fan of it and enjoying it.
Yeah.
Hearing something and going, oh, that's really cool, as opposed to, I got to learn this song.
Right.
I'm not a Swiftie.
The mechanicalness of it. Yeah.
Well, it's not so much the mechanical end of things, because I'm not playing, generally speaking, I'm not playing any music that I really have to dissect and work on a particular part for days. It's more of I have to listen to this song and learn it and play it and make it fun when I would never listen to this in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Understood. So unless you had another thought, I'd like to dive into Maslow's needs. One of the things when I was reading this and what I caught, I sort of, when I flipped through the page of the New Age magazine to look for a good example for this podcast, I saw the 15 things first. I saw the title, I saw the 15 things first, and I thought, oh, this is a really good idea. And then as I started to read the article more in depth, I noticed, oh, Abraham Maslow, of course. So I know Maslow a bit well because I learned about him in school. Back in my undergrad days, I was in a statistics program that was really focused on behavior modification, what people do, and how can we track, how do we calculate that, or how do we record that? And so Maslow inherently became one of the big pieces of conversation. If you are in a psychology, if you are in a social science, if you are in a marketing or a class where you have to deal with human nature or expectations or building something with other people, you most likely heard of Maslow's needs or his hierarchy of needs. And so Maslow came up with this hierarchy. You can Google it on, you can, Wikipedia it, of course, if you need to, and you'll see this hierarchical needs chart. It's a famous triangle. And at the bottom of the triangle, it was effectively the sort of stuff that you call the basic needs, right? And so Maslow created the triangle basically saying all humans require X amount of, so actually I'll just pull it up and it's just a little bit easier. So the needs are broken down into they're broken down into physiological needs, right? So you need food, you need water, you need shelter, you need rest, you need these things to survive.
Right.
And then above that, just slightly above that, security needs. You need things associated to safety. You need a home, a dwelling, somewhere to raise, family and etc.
Right.
Those are the basic needs. Then above that, you have the psychological needs, which are more around love and friendship and feelings of intimacy. You need family. You need that connection with other people. And then slightly above that is sort of like feelings of accomplishment, duty, service, success, all those types of things. And then at the top, which he pits or calls, he groups them up as self-fulfillment or self-actualization. This is sort of the top level. This is the esoteric. This is the high-minded. This is the transcendence and self-actualization. So to me, all the things that he was mentioning, what the brother was mentioning in his article, are very consistent with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I would be very curious, in fact, to see a paper by a Mason that really covers this hierarchy of needs. Now, this was printed in the 1980s. Maslow came up with his idea in the 1940s. I think it was around the time that he was teaching or an educator at Columbia University. And so I think he was attempting to, for the first time, organize this in a very scientific way. And so he, added a lot of mathematics into it to help calculate and to figure out what these needs are. And so I think when reading this, I think it's important, go ahead and take a look at Maslow's needs. Go take a look at that rubric, that chart, that table, or not table, sorry, that hierarchy, that triangle, and see if that is consistent with what you think is right. Now, if I were to look at this chart or this table, to me, I think Freemasonry tends to orbit at the top end of this triangle. In other words, Freemasonry is not helping you find shelter, although it obviously, from a charitable effect, it does help satisfy those needs if you need it. But I think what we're trying to do is when you're initiate, when you're a candidate in Freemasonry, what it's trying to do, or at least what the perception, or as my perception is it's trying to get to self-actualization, and it's trying to get to transcendence. It's trying to get to that higher plane of the triangle. And that is what a Mason is looking for. A Mason is looking for education. A Mason is looking to, and this is just my personal opinion. Sure. When you join Freemasonry, you are attempting to understand something that you did not know before. You are trying to understand perhaps an order, a rationale as to why you're here, to understand what these symbols mean, and they're communicated to you. And so they tend to orbit around the top level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you think that that's right, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And especially with the order of them, belonging. You're looking to join. You're looking to be a part of something, greater than yourself, to better yourself.
Right.
I'm sure people could. I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but when you get into the next portion of esteem, and I get maybe the general definition of it, some people might look at esteem as, you are a past master, or you're part of a grand line, anything like that. That could be for some people a sense of esteem, not necessarily all, because there's more than one role. And it also depends on your jurisdiction. There's more than one role in a lodge to be effective. If you could be a trustee of your lodge, you could teach a catechism class, or you could be a member of the line.
Right. And I think, and what Maslow is saying for esteem is, he's saying that it is a day-to-day experiences that attempt to provide a learning opportunity. So the idea is there's a good feeling that is emanated from you when you do something. You're accomplished, you feel great, you have a sense of great pride and esteem for your work. So I think it's less about recognition, or I'm sorry, there's obviously a connection of recognition from others in that. But I think for Maslow, it's more internal. It's more thinking about the internal esteem, the benefit.
And not to interrupt you, doesn't that work into also part of the interpretive nature of Freemasonry too? How, you hear what you shall hear type of thing?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I think you can apply Freemasonry to any part of this, of this part. I think, for example, the physiological helping brothers, brothers need help. They need
Right.
assistance. And so, to me, I think we downplay, unfortunately, there appears to be a growing movement to downplay the charitable, the fraternal,
Mhm.
the social, because there's an obsession with the esoteric. But really, it comes at a price of not really highlighting and benefiting all the public good that fraternity has done in
Right.
terms of charities, in terms of now. By charities, I don't necessarily just means, we have the Shriners hospitals. We mean that all the way back into the 18th century, these fraternities has served as public safety nets for families, for destitute widows and orphans,
Mhm.
or places that did not have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They went through fraternities to secure some of those benefits. We had
Right.
Masonic homes. We had all these things. And so I think, regardless of where you are in the hierarchy, Masonry, these social groups help fulfill those needs within those groups. Now, I think which one's more important? Maslow doesn't necessarily say. I think he tries to assume that these are all equal.
Right.
In fact, that's one of the criticisms. Late after turn of the 20th century, there has been criticism on Maslow's because it's sort of similar to that food pyramid where, well, it's not necessarily that correct. It's not necessarily that accurate. And so there is some criticism against Maslow's writings, but this is certainly, when this was printed in 1980, this was certainly part of the course. This was a popular trend that was talked about in universities
Sure.
and in marketing groups and all these, in business context, Maslow was very important. So I think you can take, to answer your question in a long response, you can apply Freemasonry across all of these.
Right. Right. And thinking too, how long did it take to, how much arguing with himself did he do to put these in order? Somebody could say safety is far more important than, or in terms of definition, food could be safety, water could be safety. You have those things about you to survive that make you feel safe. It's, there's so much further in the weeds you could go with any of the five of these. And thinking about self-actualization, because, that's the tip of the spear, the very top of it. Could self-actualization, could that be becoming a member of other appendant bodies to understand more, as opposed to just staying in the Blue Lodge?
That's right.
I'm a Blue Lodge, and well, we all have to be a member of a Blue Lodge in order to join appendant bodies. But right now, for me, Blue Lodge and Scottish Rite Masonry, that's good enough. But there may come a point where it's like, well, I need to learn something more, and I, become a Knight Templar or York Rite, anything like that. That it certainly gets you higher towards the self-actualization part.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, if you are interested in Freemasonry and you're interested in learning more and understanding more of the principles and getting the degrees, I think it's a no-brainer that you would join these other organizations because they're offering this information to you. I think there are people that say, well, it's not worth my time because I don't have time to go and do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather just focus on the Blue Lodge. Well, to me, that's sort of like saying, well, yeah, no, I just don't have time for college. I'm just going to focus on high school. And again, perhaps that is not a very good comparison because college, now there's even a growing, it's even more difficult to get into college. It's very expensive. There's certainly many reasons why people aren't going to college. But the idea to me is more about, if you're curious in learning more, then I would assume that you're interested in learning more, that you will try to consume as much of that information as possible.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. And there's new research on, needs and desires. And in fact, here's another thing. Maslow, and one of the things that I only know strictly because I remember talking about this in grad school and undergrad, this is just the first iteration. Maslow did create a new version of his hierarchy needs, and he acknowledged that this does not apply to everyone equally.
Mm-hmm.
There are parts in the process or in the entire triangle that are, some parts are smaller, some parts are bigger, so perhaps people like you and me who are interested in learning and education and getting more out of Freemasonry, perhaps that top level of self-actualization and transcendence might be a little higher than that smaller, that's, the bottom level. I know that there are brothers, and I'm sure you've met them too, who are just completely disheveled and they don't really care about certain things. That, like, there are guys that might not even eat or sleep, or there are times when I haven't slept because I'm writing a book and I was just like, I just don't need this right now. I need to focus on getting this book done and getting this work done.
Yeah.
And so at that point, just like Maslow says, these things shift over time. They shift depending. It's not a linear process. It's not equal. Not everything is percentaged out equal. So I think you have to take that into consideration. Like everything in life, this is adjusts. It fluctuates. It moves. It doesn't necessarily remain static.
Well, and the other thing too, in our day and age with the interwebs, people could go for a higher education, especially in Masonry. I mean, it's not like you can't. I'm sorry, people. You can buy all the books that we have. Anybody can buy all the books that we have published, that other writers like Brother Rulli himself have had published. Anything like that. The difference being is that until you become involved with the organization, I think your level of knowledge will be just to a certain point. You'll lack a fair amount of context until you become a part of it.
I think I see where you're going, and I think that's right. I would add to that, however, just a clarifying point that says, even if you are joining these organizations, don't expect to get all the answers. I think there is an onus on you as an individual to, if you want to learn more, to go out there and learn more. One of my criticisms, and it's always been a criticism of certain brothers, I'm not saying an individual, but just in general, this mindset, which is, oh, great, I joined the Scottish Rite, I'm a 32nd degree Mason, congratulations. Now what? Well, what do you mean? There's daily activity, there's things you can do, there's things you can engage with, you can participate in your local lodge. If you have a local temple, Scottish Rite temple that's there, you can get involved. So really, we're not going to go out of your way. We're not going to tell you what to do, because that's not the point of this organization. The organization is here to help you grow, but you have to take those steps, and you have to ask, and you have to reach out. If you don't reach out to me by email, I'll never be able to help you answer those questions. In other words, or if you don't knock on the door, the answer will never be revealed. If you don't ask the question, the answer will never be given to you. So I think there's part of that process is you going in and doing it yourself. If you're a brother that just says, hey, listen, I did Blue Lodge, I then went and got my 32nd degree, and I don't know what I'm doing, but perhaps this is just not for me, and I just want to, just do my own thing. Great. Do your own thing and do your own thing. I think no one, especially you and me, are certainly not going to judge a brother on their decision to move and to do something else. But at the very least, you had the intellectual curiosity to go and seek it out. What I suggest, though, that person does is find other things in Freemasonry that they may find just as intellectually stimulating. Go seek those out. Go join the York Rite. Go do the Scottish Rite. Go do the Shrine, and see. You will certainly find a place.
Right.
If your local Blue Lodge is not giving you the things that you want, or alternatively, if there's a lodge that's 30, 45 minutes away that might be better suited to what your interests are, well, go to that lodge. So travel, visit, do these things, do that transcendent thing that Maslow is talking about. Go out and try to follow those 15 terms or characteristics, and apply those characteristics to your everyday life. And I think by doing that, you'll become a better Mason.
There was an article that was penned anonymously that Brother Maynard shared with me. I don't know if he shared with you.
Oh, yes. I know this one on Reddit. Okay. Oh, yes.
And it was, I was reading the article, and basically what this anonymous brother, and I'm not knocking him for writing the article anonymously. I get it. You don't want any backlash. You just want to state how you feel. And that's totally cool. But he was going on about everything that his valley wasn't doing as far as ritual. He never learned anything about ritual. And all I could think of was, well, what are you doing? There's so many things at your disposal to get better with, to gain knowledge with, to interpret with. Don't wait for somebody else to go, here's a plate. Go make your own
Yeah,
plate.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated by brothers that realize that every person is different, but they think that every valley is the same or every valley should be doing the same thing. It's just not true.
Yeah.
Every valley is a living organism that's composed of different people, different times, different parts in their lives. Every lodge is the same. Every lodge, for the most part, I would say every 3 or 4 years has this major shift and turnover of membership, and there's different interests, there's different strategies, there's different goals.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in enough lodges to know that in 3 or 4 years, the priorities of this lodge will change. And so to me, if this lodge is not for you, go to a different lodge. You're
Right.
allowed to do that as a Mason. You're allowed to travel. You're allowed to gauge. And so I just find it so disappointing. Now, if it's a function of, hey, listen, that's great for you to say, Chris, when you're in a area where there are dozens of lodges around, but I only have one lodge in an hour, and that's my one lodge. Well, at that point, I would say to that brother, find ways to fix that. Apply, see what other lodges are doing, find a way to apply and fix those. And if those aren't, you're not able to do that, then rather than penning an anonymous letter, perhaps, now again, I don't know the circumstances. I'm just saying,
Sure.
perhaps engage with your leadership to acknowledge what those issues are. And quite frankly, if those things are if these things are not, again, you've done everything, you've asked the leader, you've engaged with them, then there is always someone above that person that you can speak to.
Right.
Or there are brothers. Go to Masonic Week, engage with other brothers in different conferences and symposia. Take a little time to go somewhere else, and you'll find perhaps brothers that share your feelings, and then start a relationship with them.
Yeah. And what's really cool we have here in Maryland, I haven't looked to see if other states do this, but our Grand Lodge has a Harvest Home Day in October, and I'll try not to oversleep this year to miss it. Yeah, you're there dark in the morning, but if show me, at least in the state of Maryland, a larger gathering of brothers, it's a really good time, and there's just to hang, talk, chat about nothing related to Masonry, or if there's someone there that is going to be there, that you have the opportunity to pull aside and go, hey, brother, can you explain something to me or help me understand something a little bit better?
Yeah.
Here's your chance, along with sausage and pancakes.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And also, I guess I also want to clarify that I believe I spoke to Marinard about this. I think one of the criticisms also came from the fact that he was a COVID. We believe that he must have been a COVID initiate. So he got his degrees during the COVID lockdown, which is certainly not the same as an in-person initiation or an in-person reunion.
For sure.
So I think we want to take that into heart. And so I certainly, there are brothers who responded to him on that Reddit post to basically say, we're here to help you. If you want to reach out to a brother, reach out to the brother. And so he certainly has a community that is willing to engage with him. All he needs to do is reach out to that community that extended a helping hand.
Well, in wrapping this up, I really enjoyed, something outside of Masonry to correlate with Masonry and to help me think a little bit more about Masonry and how to be a better Mason, better person. Really, thank you for picking this one. What were your thoughts on it?
I'm trying my best to go through the old New Age articles and to try to find stuff that we really don't see today.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really talk about, maybe things that are a little outdated and helps us understand why they're outdated. I really like this because I was familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I was slightly surprised to see it in a Masonic context. I'm trying to think about it, and I don't think of any context where I saw Maslow's needs in a Masonic presentation or a paper. And so it was a nice little, just like, oh wow, someone had the insights to write this, and then the editor of the New Age magazine thought, oh, okay, this is enough to publish it as well.
Yeah.
So I really like finding these types of articles. If you're still listening to this podcast right now, and it's 40 something minute, maybe more, I strongly let us know, reach out to us and ask us what are the kinds of articles you want us to publish or to take a look at and to talk about. So if you want to look at more esoteric stuff, historical biographies, weirdo technical business stuff like Maslow's hierarchy or psychology things, let us know and we'll try to take a look and see if we can find those in the New Age. So this is an open invitation to anyone to reach out to say, hey Chris, I want to learn more about what Masons talked about in 1940, or let's talk about research, let's talk about history, let us know, reach out to us, and we'll find something that perhaps entertains your interest.
Not to mention, take those 15 characteristics that we discussed a handful of, but take those 15 characteristics and see which ones you already embody, as well as which ones you could strive towards.
Absolutely.
And I think what Chris is also saying, he wants you to help make his job on this podcast a little bit easier.
Well, I mean, that's...
I'll cut that out. No, I'm kidding.
No. Keep it in. Keep everything in. I want to make sure everyone knows. Keep that in. I think to me is sometimes we don't know. Again, it's that what was that characteristic where we're so interested in the here and now and the details that we don't take a step back and see what we've created. So to me, I think this is one of these articles where share this podcast with a group of brothers the night before your meeting or a couple days before your next state of communication. Have them listen to this podcast, go through all those 14 or 15 characteristics, have a sit down conversation about the characteristics you think that are important and how you can apply that. And that's an opportunity for a program in your Blue Lodge. And so that's just one of the things that you can do. It doesn't help us out at all. It doesn't get us any benefit, but the idea is just it's another tool in your toolkit. It's another resource that you can use.
Well, I think that's about all that we have. We've aired as much out as we could possibly stand of each other, and you're yawning now, so that's a clear-cut sign.
That yawn was completely intentional, unintentional, I promise.
Fair enough. All right. So once again, thank you for listening to the New Age Masonic Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the New Age magazine, predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. I am Brother Matt Bowers, 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. Excuse me. That is the Honorable and Sleepy Brother Chris Ruley, 32nd degree KCCH. We'll see you next time here at the New Age Masonic Podcast.
Bye.